If I had a nickel for every time coming off a weekend I make a video on Mercedes' problems, then call me the first trillionaire. Look, I can't help myself. Mercedes always gives us good stories to talk about, and I'll be damned if I don't take up on their offer. So last week, I made a video about how George is losing Mercedes, where I basically said George could be on his way out of the team if Kimi keeps improving. Luckily for good old Georgie, Canada could be redemption time if he is able to sweep the weekend and show the world he still has it. And it's looking good so far since he has sprint pole, sprint win, although we will talk about that later. A pole for the main race, so a win is in there, right? Another weekend has now gone by where George, through no fault of his own, has his results hampered, and in the case of Canada, a DNF is the last thing he needed right now. Kimi Antonelli now leads the standings by a whopping 43 points, and yes, we are barely heading to round 6, but all the stars seem to be pointing at a Kimi Antonelli title victory. Of course, Kimi will soon decline in performance. I mean, he can't win every race, right? George will come back and fight Kimi and win. Hell, Canada could have been that. Kimi is not... But regardless, he is pretty damn good, so this is basically me saying, shut up about there being no title fight now. If anything, we should all know damn well to count George out this early, considering what happened just last year with McLaren. When Oscar was some 30 points up on Lando after his untimely engine DNF at Zandvoort, everyone and their mothers counted Lando out and said, oh, the title's in Oscar's bag. However, I made the bold gamble to say that Lando will not only come back, but win the title over Oscar despite the deficit, because I understood something. Lando had mistake after mistake for the first quarter of the season, but after his crash in Canada, Lando was relatively flawless and driving the best he had all season long. Once the BS can be blown away from his side, he could and absolutely would beat Oscar at every given chance, and what happened? Exactly that. So to anyone counting out George for a 43-point deficit to Kimi in first, heading to round 6 with 16 rounds to go, grow a brain. But despite that, the two seasons are still similar, right? I don't know. I actually think while on paper it seems similar, fundamentally, they are nothing alike. So let's dig deep into what truly separates 2025 from 2026 and maybe see if at least the end result could be similar as well. Subscribe if you have sibling troubles, and let's get to quacking now.
A good weather for a race, but especially for a dog.
So to truly understand the similarities and differences between the 2 years, let us dissect the seasons of the drivers involved. These drivers are, of course, Lando 2025, Oscar 2025, and then George and Kimi 2026. Beginning with Lando's 2025 season, he, of course, won the title. However, it was anything but easy. Heading into 2025, Lando was touted as the heavy favorite, especially made more clear after preseason testing. Before preseason, we had people touting either Lando or Charles for the title fight, since both McLaren and Ferrari looked to have the fastest car at the end of the 2024 season. And with 2025 being the last season before a major regulation change, it would be stupid enough to change up the entire car and waste resources on that. Ferrari would. Ferrari absolutely would. So that's why post preseason, Lando was basically the only guy expected to win the title, as Red Bull still lacked some pace. Sure, Oscar was in the other McLaren car, but come on, bro. Lando had the experience. He literally almost won it the previous year, but didn't due to avoidable mistakes. Now that the mistakes are out, Lando will sweep up the title, and we had to deal with it. Round 1 in Australia was wet, where other than Lando nearly binning it, Lando was pretty flawless. And even with his mistake, the track got wet pretty quickly, and plenty of other drivers were caught out too. So great, round 1 was easy. Let's see how round 2 is gonna go. And it begins. Let's speedrun this, since I'm sure you remember all of this anyways. Round 2 sees Lando locking his fronts in both qualifying to prevent him getting pole. Round 3 sees Lando mess up his tires trying to be sneaky in the pits. Round 4 sees another lockup in the race to prevent his pole, along with starting in P5.5 instead of P6, getting him an early penalty. Jeddah saw Lando crash in Q3 and ruin his race already, but as if it couldn't get any worse, got DRS duped by Lewis too many times in the race. Round 6 in Miami sees Lando with more lockups and forgetting how to overtake, which allows Piastri to dart away. Round 9 sees more lockups, and of course, Canada sees a crash between him and Oscar. And nearly all the rounds, Lando did some sort of mistake that fucked him over in ways his partner could only wish to do to him. By this point, many wrote him off for the title, as he was far too mistake prone to win it, while his teammate Pastry seemingly wasn't. But that was not true. Oscar Piastri was capable of doing mistakes too, and when he did, it always cost him to Lando. But that's for later. After Canada, Lando ultimately dug deep and found out why he was fucking up all the time. It's because he's comparing himself too much, comparing himself to Oscar, to Max, to the vision fans and himself had of him. He was trying to drive in a way that wasn't him at all without realizing that's completely unnatural. So he started to lock in. No more delta time in the qualifying. If he gets pole, he gets pole. If he doesn't, boo-hoo. He immediately gets pole in round 10 and wins the race despite pressure from Pastry. He does the same again in round 11 at home in Britain, except Max was the one on pole. Round 12 at Spa sees Lando get pole, but in tricky conditions, lost out to Oscar in the race and couldn't reclaim first again. The Lando of old would have been comparing himself to others to see why he failed. This new Lando instead looked at his driving and understood his mistake and wouldn't do it again, or at least try. Round 13 in Hungary sees Lando bogged down a lot thanks to a bad start. Old Lando would have kept on crumbling and have a bad race. New Lando instead kept his head down and let opportunity come if it opens up, which it absolutely did. He went on an alternative strategy with the one stop, which ended up being the winning strategy. Lando was now close to Oscar in the title fight, and should he keep this form up, he will overtake him. But of course, round 13 is Zandvoort sees an engine DNF and it should be all but over. But it isn't. Round 14, he outdrives Oscar. Round 15, he outdrives him again while Oscar crashes. Round 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, he just outdoes Oscar in every single one of them. But how? Well, one side of it is, again, he stopped comparing himself and accepted his driving for what it is, which led to a better mental state and ability behind the wheel. I mean, if you tell yourself you're shit, it's gonna manifest eventually. However, there is another side as well, and this relates to Oscar's season. We already recapped most of 2025, but here it is from Oscar's perspective. Heading into the season, he had low pressure since he's new, only joining in 2023. Why would the world be expected of him? This gives him the benefit of being able to just drive and not have to live up to anything. So while round 1 started good but ended very poorly, again, no one berated him for it since he's a 30-year driver not expected to win the title. Boo-hoo, man, who cares? Meanwhile, everyone is already saying that Lando will sweep the title after round 1, confirming he will be champion already. This pressure starts to hit Lando very early, while remember, there ain't a lick of it from Oscar's side, though he wins in China, and come rounds 4, 5, and 6, Oscar wins them all with no challenge since Lando is busy beating himself up. Round 7 is a little bit tougher though, since Max easily dupes him at the start, with round 8 exacerbating this since he nearly crashes with every single lap he takes. But again, no pressure. Lando is sucking ass and is having more and more pressure pile onto him instead of Oscar. Oscar wins in Spain, gets crashed into in Canada, but can still finish, and is very impressive in Austria. However, the result there did not swing in his favor since of course Lando won that race. Oscar knew he had to bounce back at Silverstone, and for the first half of it, it seemed that way. Oscar is able to fire up his tires better than anyone else in the tricky conditions and establish a big lead. However, Oscar had a severe lapse in his judgment once a safety car came out where on restart, he broke really hard, which nearly sent some drivers in the back of others, and this was dangerous enough to give him a penalty. Once he served it, he of course was behind Lando and on better conditions, couldn't establish a lead again, and even went over radio to try and plead for his position back from Lando, to which they said no, of course. Oscar was mighty pissed. Fans were pissed since they saw an Oscar they didn't expect, and slowly now, pressure starts to build on his end. He wins in Spa again after Lando had a poor start, and here we go. In Hungary, Oscar is second behind Charles, while we of course know Lando had a poor start. Oscar buys his time for when Ferrari fucked Charles, which happens around lap 40, and now Oscar should easily be in the lead with Lando miles back. Huh? He's in front? Well, he's on ancient tires, while Oscar has shiny new ones. It'll be an easy overtake. Huh? Lando is defending well? But he can't be. I'm on new tires. Oscar gets desperate, but isn't able to get past Lando, and again, more pressure is building. Round 13 in Zandvoort is ultimately the boiling point. Lando's DNF now means Oscar has a mighty 30-point gap in the standings, and in theory, Oscar should breathe easy now, but no. With such a big gap and only 10 rounds to go, everyone is expecting Oscar to win the title, to the point where he is being asked about it in the interviews, much to his discomfort, of course. Now, perhaps Oscar has to start driving as a champion to be a champion, and uh-oh, he is starting to break a bit. In Monza, he is behind Lando for much of the weekend. That's not good. In Baku, he crashed twice in the weekend. Oh boy. He was behind in Singapore again and couldn't make his way past. Coda was the same, Mexico was the same, Brazil was the same, Vegas was the same, Qatar was better, but by this point, Oscar lost his 30-point advantage and in fact is sitting third in the standings now. He has an outside chance to win the title in Abu Dhabi still, but it's too out of left field and isn't able to do it. Talk about a dramatic decline. Two factors led to this fall off. One is that Oscar cited low grip tracks as a flaw of his, which was apparent at places like Canada and Imola, but those races were still better than races like COTA or Mexico. And this is because, two, Oscar has never had to deal with title pressure before, especially when it piled on too quickly and had to fight others having this pressure. Something that is objective is that when Oscar won his races, he rarely fought for them. He was 10 seconds ahead of everyone else under no pressure behind for the wins. Now that Lando picked himself up again and Max was given a car to fight the McLarens, Oscar now had pressure behind in the races on top of the pressure in his head about being a champion so young and unexpectedly. He just crumbled that, in my opinion, was just as bad, if not worse, than Lando earlier in the year. So is this dynamic the same as the Mercedes pair in 2026? Well, George this year was touted heavily to win the title like Lando was last year. And even with the surprise that Ferrari is good in preseason, Mark still looked overly dominant. Heading to round one, it was a clean sweep. Ferrari were fighting with them at first, but Mercedes played the long game, and in the end, it was not a contest, with George easily winning the race. Heading to China, things looked to be the same. George took sprint pole and sprint win, and heading to main qualifying, he looked fast yet again. But in Q3, George had some engine battery troubles that were fixed, but did lose performance still, which led to Kimi taking pole position. Okay, well, the race can be an easier time, and soon enough, George is behind Kimi, ready to overtake. But uh-oh, safety car is out now thanks to the Stroll, and in the pits, George is shafted since Mark had a double stack, and on restart, George was unable to fire up the tires, which led to him being behind both Ferraris. He made his way back up to second, but by that time, Kimi was miles ahead and came home to win his very first race. Not ideal, but Japan could be better, right? In qualifying, Kimi gets pole over George, where he had more issues in his car, but in the race, George does look to have better pace, and as it starts, Kimi gets a bad start and is behind George already. Great, and as the race progresses, George is finding himself in prime position to win, so he makes his one and only stop and is ready to hunt, with only an untimely safety car being the only way for him to fail. An untimely safety car is out now, seconds after George pits, and who benefits from this? Kimi in the lead, who hadn't stopped yet. Well, George could at least still get second, which he is doing, but his engine glitches out, which puts him behind again and only finishes fourth. I mean, my oh my, how could it get worse than this? In Miami, he has engine troubles all weekend long, where his battery deployment is just not working, which means he can only manage a P4. He also cites how he struggles in low grip, but you get the feeling that without the car troubles, P4 was never on the cards for him. George is many points behind now, while Kimi is winning everything, so Canada, a track George loves, must be better. And hey, George is back on top with the sprint pole and sprint victory, but it was not easy. Kimi was right there, putting George under pressure, but George fought well, and in qualifying, George got pole, so all he needs to do is keep it calm again and win the main race. And guess what? He does just that. He trades places with Kimi for the lead many times, but George is staying collected, overtaking when the time is right, and is looking more poised to win over Kimi, who is still raging. So why do the results say Kimi won and George has a DNF? Well, of course, his engine gave out in the middle of the fight. He was fuming since, again, through no fault of his own, he cannot maximize his results. I mean, why wouldn't you be mad? Meanwhile, Kimi, through all of this, is just winning. He is having minimal issues with his car, and despite making a mistake or two, he recovers from this very easily too, and is able to push his way to victory, whether it was contested or not. The only race he didn't win this year was, of course, round one in Australia, but he did have a crash in FP3, which led to him having to complete the weekend on an unupgraded and faulty chassis that put him at a big disadvantage. Yeah, these seasons are not at all the same. Other than the look of experienced driver facing troubles in the title fight against their significantly inexperienced teammate, the similarities end. McLaren 2025 was defined by drivers under pressure to be the best as possible, which ends up hurting their performances. Lando had his troubles early on, Oscar had his late on, plus Lando could actually fight for victories with other drivers, while Oscar rarely had to fight for his wins, which put him at a disadvantage when he inevitably had to fight for some, most of which he lost out on. He also had trouble adapting to certain circuits compared to Lando, who could drive nearly every track type with relative skill. 2026, however, is completely different. George has been driving so good this season, but you wouldn't know since his results do not reflect this one bit. Miami was probably the only weekend where pace-wise, he was straight up never going to beat Kimi. All the other rounds, in my opinion, he could and probably would have beaten Kimi if his car did not have as many issues as it did. This is not discrediting Kimi, by the way. Kimi is driving driving so damn good right now for a driver in their second year of F1 ever, but he is making many mistakes along the way. He can recover from these, but they shouldn't be happening in the first place if he truly wants to win the title. Kimi is so bloody quick, and despite what some would have you believe, his racing standards have been good, albeit could definitely use some more relaxed elements. Kimi has amazing trajectory right now, which is why I have been saying since before preseason to give him some damn time. He is not going to win everything and be a champion so quick. He is generational, but not even Max in his second year of F1 could win the title, even if Red Bull were as good, if not better than Mercedes. Sure, Lewis won a title in his second year, but let's be real, guys. He was lucky Massa was his rival and not Kimi Raikkonen. Kimi Antonelli is far from flawless, and while his wins are very impressive, they shouldn't be expected of him, and when he does decline, I do not want to be seeing some bullshit narrative that he is a wasted talent or some other bullshit like that. I still 100% back George for the title this year because objectively, he has driven better despite the bad results. His bad luck is just good old F1 being brutal and not down to things like pressure. So to me, anyone saying things like Mark are sabotaging George Russell simply do not understand the sport they watch. So those are my thoughts on 2025 versus 2026. I love Kimi more than George, and I want Kimi to win the title, but using our brains, George will win the title this year, and I could only hope Kimi uses his experience to mount an even better challenge next year. Anyways, I want to give a quick shout out to all my Brazil Flag for the continued support, and make sure to join if you all cool benefits as well as just helping me out. Anyways, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to like and subscribe since it really helps me out, and make sure to let me know in the comments what you think of this. And as always, have an amazing day.
Good weather for the duck.